you start by saying in the article that in in popular depictions of AI in films and TV and novels, big tech would, quote, undersell and overdeliver.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of something like Battlestar Galactica, the
Yeah.
Cylons, or the Kalon in the Orville or Terminator, that what generally happens in sci-fi is we create some little AI slaves to do our bidding, and they become self-aware, and they decide they don't want to be enslaved to us anymore. And in the case of the Kalon, they decide to exterminate humanity, and
Yeah.
I think the
Mm.
Cylons do as well later. So everything goes very wrong when they realize they've just been created to be our slaves, and they decide to go one better. So what happens is that the tech is more sophisticated and more autonomous than we thought it was going to be. It escapes our control. And you say that what's happening with major AI is the opposite. So Sam Altman actually said something like ChatGPT is now more powerful than any human being,
That's right.
which, if you've watched any sci-fi, sounds quite terrifying, but actually seriously underdelivers on the promise. Do you want to start
Yeah.
there and talk our listeners through that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really the power that big tech have over us, is that most of us have been primed by growing up with these depictions in sci-fi that have informed our own expectations. So because historically, at least in the artistic representation of AI, it always underpromised and over-delivered, we sort of put our guard down, right? And so we're more receptive to the AI hype. And that's what they're exploiting. When you read a lot of the interviews and you look through the messages they're pushing, if even half of it was true, they wouldn't have to push it the way they're pushing. So, if, as Altman states, his AI is smarter than any PhD, any human on earth, we'd all adopt it, right? Without hesitation. But that's not the case. And it's disappointing because, something that I do state in the article and in my books and in my lectures is that I'm not anti tech. I want innovation. I believe in innovation. I'm excited for innovation. But what I don't like is bullshit. And I don't like being exploited. And I don't like bad business models. And that's more what's happening here. If they wouldn't call this product AI, we'd probably have less critiques, right? So if they said, hey, this is sort of better than a search engine. Oh, okay, that's cool. Hey, it's a new sort of database. Oh, okay, that's cool. It's a new editing software. Great. But they're saying it's intelligent and they're saying it's smarter than us and they're saying it's better than us. And there may come a day when there is a tech product that is smarter, better, et cetera than us, maybe. I don't know. But it's not going to come from this architecture. It might come, in future iterations built on neurosymbolic AI or something different. But large language models are probability calculators, and they're probability calculators that make mistakes. So it's still a wondrous innovation, and it's still an engineering feat, and it's still something we didn't have, 20 years ago. But it's not this great tool that they're pretending it to be. Why are we buying it? We're buying it because we think it's R2D2. We think it's C3PO. We imagine the stories we grew up on where they said, hey, here's a servant. It's smart. It's going to help you. It's going to do what you need it to do. And it did that. And as you know, it then did worse because it rebelled and tried to take over society or destroy humanity. Okay, but that's a great competence. Our AI doesn't have that competence. And so it's frustrating to see how easily folks are being manipulated by the AI hype. And they're bringing a lack of skepticism that I think they would bring to any other innovation. Really, when you think about it, I can't think of another innovation that was just accepted so wholeheartedly without question. And it's why they're starting to suffer now, the big tech companies, because businesses are finally being asked to pay for it. And they're saying, wait a minute, it's not delivering. So why would we pay for this? Individual folks who use it for free are a little more forgiving. But given the astronomical cost that they're incurring to create this product, and given how few people are paying anywhere near the actual cost of its production, it's a problematic place to find ourselves in. And, you find the debate is generally between the big tech AI hype folks and the AI doomers. But the doomers buy into the same propaganda because the doomers say, no, one day it's going to destroy us all. One day it's going to be ever more powerful. And we need more voices saying, it's not what the AI doomers say. It's not what the hype folks say. It's something different. It's a cool product, but it's not intelligent. It's not changing the world as wildly as they imagine. It might be good. It might have some uses. It's built badly, breaks a lot of laws, doesn't respect intellectual property, exploits a lot of people, right? Does a lot of harm, could do good, but we're not having those conversations. And I think that's too bad.
I mean, I have noticed that some of the AI folks are already talking about the product as sentient.
Hmm.
And in one of the other articles that we've published on AI and Quillette, or maybe one that's forthcoming at this point when people are listening to the podcast, I'm not sure whether it will be out, but it's about the way in which the AI companies are using that claim that the product is sentient to try to get past regulation. So we can't ban it because it's a sentient being. And I I kind of actually don't see how an AI can become sentient, but I definitely don't see how an LLM can become sentient. Like, I
Right,
don't see how
right,
ChatGPT or Claude could become
right,
sentient.
right,
It's just a tool of amalgamation. And I have noticed it's actually got a bit worse at doing the things that I'm asking it to do, which is
right,
things like proofreading documents. So it's become worse at that, more less likely to spot things like a doubled, a the doubled up like that, which you often get in proofreading because of the way the editing process works. It's not spotting typos and things like that, which I'm kind of surprised by. Um,
right.
and I also I also noticed that about 6 months ago, they had AIs that were doing really quite good translations, and now
Hmm.
if you try to translate using the AI, it does a terrible job of it, and it's actually easier and quicker to do translating the old-fashioned way,
Right,
using a thesaurus to look up alternative phrases in English until you find the one that seems to express the original meaning most closely.
right,
So I I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't understand why it's gone kind of backwards in competence. But I'm told, and I've got no real way to judge this, that the AI is going to advance at such a rapid stage that we can't predict now what its capabilities will be in 2 or 3 months. And I was wondering actually, so there seems to be a big gap between the verbal kind of AI products like Claude and ChatGPT and the visual and auditory and video products. So those video-based products have have improved absolutely enormously to a quite frightening extent because now it seems to be very easy to deepfake video and to make it appear that someone said words that they didn't say, and to deepfake photos, and the newest iterations look extremely realistic. There's no more of the six finger and weird
right,
writing and things like that.
right,
They look very realistic, and nevertheless, the LLMs still sound like LLMs, very boring, everything is hedged,
right,
everything is repetitious and cliché,
right,
and are having more difficulty doing simple tasks like just spotting a spelling mistake in a text
right,
than they
right.
were 6 months ago. Do you know what explains as a neuroscientist, could you explain what might account for that gap in capabilities between verbal
Okay.
and visual media?
So let's break down a bunch of things. We covered so much ground here, and let's break each piece of it down. So first thing is there could be a number of things happening behind the scenes that I don't know about because I'm not an engineer there. It could be that they're scaling down because it's just so expensive. And so they're releasing less high quality models right now because of the high cost of running the best models. So, you can look at that as one of the reasons, but let's look big
Mm,
picture if you think. So, number one, consciousness, right? The reason these folks are claiming that their products are consciousness. Okay, let's do two things. One reason is a business hype argument. Okay, so let's say they're cynical and they're being dishonest and it's just hype. There's those folks. But there's another thing happening too. There's also folks who aren't cynical and who honestly believe that these LLMs have the possibility to be conscious because their definition of consciousness is utterly uninteresting. So, I think of Jeff Hinton, right? He's regarded as the godfather of AI. Brilliant man. And I mean that, like truly brilliant man in his field. But he said things like, I don't think there's anything special about people other than to other people. He said things like, consciousness is an uninteresting idea. It's pre scientific, right? So, to him, he's not interested in consciousness. He's not interested in people. He thinks very poorly of us. So I don't even think he's being cynical when he says things like, I believe this LLM will be conscious, because if you're not excited by people, if you view the notion of consciousness as anti scientific, if you're so hyper rational and disparaging of what humans are, then it's easy to describe your LLM in more grandiose terms. So I don't think he's being insincere. I think he's belying the fact that his expertise is not related to human understanding. His expertise is not related to well-being, social well-being, psychology, etc. He also had a line I talk about it in my book where he said he's been wrestling with understanding sleep. And one of the things that he really wonders about is what's the computational function of sleep, because he views our brains as computers and can only imagine that sleep's purpose is similar to a computer. So he's completely ignorant of that literature, right? There are folks in that field who talk about what may be happening in the REM state versus the NREM state, who look at, how what we do in sleep has more to do with the sleep state than the waking state, and he only understands us as meat robots. So, when folks say LLMs can be conscious, either they're hyping a product that they want to sell, or they're not really interesting thinkers. No one who's serious, who understands the philosophy of consciousness, who understands humanity, will say stuff like that. So let's put that out there. Then there's another complicating factor, right? And now this is the business profit we speak. Let's put on that hat and say, you know, even for folks who believe that if we scale up, we can achieve consciousness, the cost of scaling up, it's beyond comprehension right now. Okay. And so, these companies already are struggling to pay their bills. And so they want you to believe that if they got access to more compute, that as long as they kept growing, the product will be better and better and better. They want you to believe it because they want government to believe it, because they need government to step in right now to keep funding, because the private sector is starting to get cynical. So now you have another layer here where they want to convince you that their product will reach consciousness if only they can just keep building more and more data centers, if only they can acquire more compute. And they want government to buy that because they want government money. And so it's rooted in more of a twisted business plan than an actual empirical reality. So now we have this messy world where you have folks who are just hypes, hyping just because that's who they are. You have folks who are tactically trying to raise more money to try to convince you this is what's happening for that reason. You have folks who don't really have an interest in understanding consciousness who are also pushing their vision. And it's all a mess because as an average consumer, where do you fit into this? And I would even argue, by the way, that I don't think the videos are that impressive, because what you're seeing are short videos. So, compare it to the growth of the text LLM, right? So for a while, they released their best model and it was very good. And then they started pulling back, right? And you find the more you use it, remember, it's a probability calculator. Let's say it's a calculator that makes a mistake 2% of the time. Okay. So if you're only using it for a sentence or two, that 2% mistake, you don't really worry about it. But as you use it more and more and more, those errors compound and becomes more problematic. With videos, you're seeing short form videos, right? You're not seeing 2-hour movies. They don't have a good understanding of the world. They don't have a world model. The physics in a lot of these videos is terrible. So they progressed away from the six fingers but they still don't understand the laws of physics or how things will interact, which you may not care about if you're creating deep fake pornography, right? Because your goal in using the tool is something more subversive, something more, you know, uh, evil, and that consumer is less concerned with the specifics of the physics. Um, but you're having a world where, once again, same idea. They show how wonderful it is for a short clip, doesn't respect intellectual property, doesn't respect copyright, doesn't respect any boundaries. I gave the example of deepfake pornography because OpenAI is now allowing folks to do that. They've removed that guardrail because they're starting to recognize, well, if businesses aren't going to embrace the product, where can we rely on folks to spend money? Historically, most tech was first embraced by the pornography industry and then moved out from there. So it's a messy world we're in. I know this was all a lot of talk, but it's because we have these conflicting issues of bad business model, okay tech, uninformed consumers, unreliable government, right? Government's not stepping in to take a lead, at least not in America. In Europe, they're doing an okay job somewhat of stepping in. In North America, they're not. And we sit back and we say, what are we to do with all this? And it relates back to the point we started with, which is these are all questions we never thought we'd have to ask, because the way AI was presented in science fiction, in our stories, historically was, hey, it's going to do what it says it's going to do. And it's not doing what it says it's going to do.
Mm,
And so we have to
mm.
parse the politics and the business and the philosophy to try to find our way here.
What would I mean, one question that I have always been wondering about is, let's just imagine, an LLM could become conscious. How would we know, given that, what the LLM generates in words is things that it's taking from a database of human words? So how would we be able to know that it was conscious?
Yeah, we don't have an answer for that. The old standard was the Turing. There used to be an understanding that if you could fool someone and not know whether it's the AI answering you or a human, that would be evidence of consciousness. But that's not good enough anymore. And we don't really have a good answer for what sort of test we need to prove consciousness. I gave a talk recently in San Francisco, and we had a lot of tech folks in the room, spiritually minded tech folks in that room. And they were all saying, it's not conscious. It's a tool. We're building an amazing tool. It's a wondrous tool, but we're not going to pretend otherwise because we don't even understand consciousness on the human level. So if we can't, like the best neuroscience today cannot explain robustly the conscious state, cannot explain our mental state. We don't even understand how our brain works. So if we don't fully understand us, how can we understand that level that a artificial product that we build has to reach? What we know is that we are wondrous beings. And that was the main point of the article for Quillette, which is that our natural intelligence is still mind blowing. The little things we learn about ourselves in neuroscience is still mind blowing. So, before we're rushing to put the stamp of consciousness on a tool, and an imperfect tool that we're creating, why don't we fully understand all of our myriad of abilities, all of our level of interaction, our embodied cognition, our intuition, the fact that most of our thinking, not most, but, our thinking isn't solely in the brain, but throughout our body, our nervous system thinks, our gut thinks, our heart thinks. This is all so much more interesting to me, because if we can't understand the mechanics of true consciousness, right? If we can't scientifically explain it, but we can understand or start to understand some of the benefits we enjoy as conscious being, let's do the deep dive there. Let's be as human as possible. Let's be fully human and try to broaden our understanding of our own thinking, if that makes sense.
So you talk about the article, recent discoveries that have revolutionized neuroscience, discoveries about
Mhm.
embodied cognition.
Mhm.
Can you run us through some of those going into some of the specifics?
I mean, the one that I loved the most was the finding that when we're together in social situations, our brain waves actually sync. That to me is just unbelievable, right? The fact that
Can I
they know
ask what
empirically, yeah,
what are
yeah.
brain waves from a scientific perspective? What is meant by brainwave, and what's meant
So
by syncing?
what happened was they used fMRI technology to map neural activity. And so what they were finding is that the way the neurons fire becomes similar in social situations. So in other words, what's going on inside my brain, the neurons that are firing, and the neurons in your brain, when we're in sync, when we're in a concert together, let's say, and we're both into the music and we're grooving in the same way, and they wrap this tech around us, they find that our neurons are firing in sync, which is wild because, in the hippie world, there was this idea forever, oh yeah, man, we're in the same energy. We're on the same page, right? They use the more metaphysical concepts that I think you might be cynical about, right? But here there's an understanding that our brain, the way we're thinking, changes when we're in social settings. And the more similar that is, which is to say, the more in sync we are, the more satisfied we are with the experience. That's unbelievable. Another piece of research that really blew my mind was,
Can I just go into that?
yeah,
Can I go into
sure.
that in a bit more detail? So fMRI is measuring blood flow, right, to specific brain regions? Is that correct?
My understanding is that it's neural activity. My PhD isn't in neuroscience, so I can't walk you through the specifics of the test they ran. I'm just an academic who read the studies. So
Um,
yeah,
'Cause
sorry.
I mean, you wouldn't be able to be at a concert in the fMRI machine. So what I'm
Correct.
wondering is whether what they're testing is people's similar responses to the same music. I'm wondering how they test that, how they test with MRI the social element of it, because with MRI, you're each inside the tube of your
So
own separate machine.
so for the concert, what they did is they had a violinist perform brief excerpts from a dozen different compositions, which were videotaped and played back to a listener. The researchers tracked the changes in local brain activity, as you noted, by measuring levels of oxygenated blood. The musical performance caused an increase in oxygenated blood flow to areas of the brain related to understanding patterns, interpersonal intentions, and expression. Data for the musician, which was collected, was then compared to those for the listener, who were then in the machine during the playback. 12 selections. All the pieces resulted in synchronization of brain activity between the musician and the listener. Interbrain cohesion was insignificant. The authors explained that the listener required time to initially understand the musical pattern, but once they understood it and were able to enjoy the performance, it then synchronized and matched the brain activity we saw in the performer. The synchronized brain activity was localized to the left hemisphere of the brain. Uh, this area is important for empathy and may function retrieval of sounds patterns that give rise to musical expectations. So there's
Yeah.
the
I
explanation
mean,
of that study.
I feel that that might be a bit overstated. So presumably when they say in the performer, they
That's
mean
one study. Wait,
when
let me pull out more. Let
yeah.
me pull out more.
Um, can I just say a few comments
Yeah,
about it? So
please.
presumably when they say
Yeah.
in the performer, they mean when the performer was watching a video back of his performance, because again,
No,
you
no, no,
can't
no.
play violin in the scanner. So how are they measuring blood flow whilst he's playing?
Okay, interesting. So let's find another one. Oh, this is fair. I
Um
didn't do the deep dive here.
The
So,
other thing
yeah.
is that I think we shouldn't get too excited. So fMRI is often doing things like there's a 1% increase in blood flow, and it's not super precise about which areas, and you would expect certain areas of the brain to have greater activation when you're listening to music. So I kind of don't see a social aspect there, an idea of vibing together in that's separate people in an MRI machine listening to the same piece of music and having a little bit of blood flow increase in some areas of the brain that are associated with feelings and perceptions when you're listening to music. So I kind of
Hmm.
feel that the researchers might be over egging that pudding a bit.
Fully possible. But why don't we look at other things, right? So
Yep.
let's drop the fMRI stuff, okay?
Mm,
So there's also been studies that have found that the best success in therapy, the indicator of a successful therapy session was when the therapist and the patient started mirroring each other. So they embrace similar posture, they use similar terms. In other words, there was something happening in that social situation where, again, there seems to be more of an effort towards synchronicity and alignment. And I found that interesting too, because, intuitively, one would have thought that perhaps the greatest indicator of success in therapy would be a verbal expression. The aha, thanks for the breakthrough, or, like, oh, I really never thought of it that way. But again, there seems to be support that suggests that when we're in this social relationship, we start to act differently, mimic each other. And I found that encouraging and exciting as well. But I get if it doesn't turn you on because,
mm,
so I don't talk about this in the article, right? Because it's just a short article. But in the book, I extensively frame the fact that the reason I went on this journey is because I am an algorithmic thinker, right? My
mm,
background is very rational. I was raised hyper rational, and I'm still uncomfortable with embodied thinking. It's still not natural to me. And I'll give you, an even a simple example that I think you are actually better than I am, because I know from reading about you and reading your comments that you're a dancer, and I know your work on that, right? And dancing is a type of thinking. It's a type of embodied thinking. It's a type of embodied thinking that I don't get. I can't do. I'm uncomfortable with it, right? I can't tap into it. And I know that those who can are at an advantage to me. And so, the journey of this book was less me looking to support a worldview that I came to, but actually the opposite. The journey of this book was for me to say, I want to move away from the algorithmic framing because, frankly, let's put it this way, let's tie it back to what we discussed before. If the highest form of human cognition is algorithmic, then we don't have a future, because the AI in any of its state will always be better at algorithmic thinking than we will be. As a calculator, they're better. Our best hope for becoming superior to any AI is by tapping into our non-algorithmic thinking, our embodied thinking, etc. And so I appreciate the skepticism you're bringing.
mm.
I wish I was a little more prepared to do the deep
That's all
dive in
right.
the article. And I want to talk to you again about it because I want to go back and look up. That's on me for not being prepared to have that.
Ah, sure.
Um,
I
but
didn't mean
but
to
the,
catch you
yeah.
out. I just, um, uh, I want to just go back more specifically to the AI and to some of the things in your article for a moment. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was how AIs approach writing versus how humans approach writing. And you talked about writing is part of, not separate from, the process of thinking, and outsourcing it to machines will come with a serious cognitive cost. Do you want to talk a little bit about the implications and aspects of that?
Yeah, and again, it's so multifaceted, so I can unpack all the different ways we're seeing it. So, as a professor, it's heartbreaking to see my students outsource their writing to the AI. And I'm not even talking about cheating for grades, because let's park that. Again, that's the ethical question. Let's park the ethical question.
Mm.
I get sad because when I talk to some of my students, I say, "Why did you do that?" Right? You know that I want your best work. I want you to learn. Why did you do that? And their response is always, oh, I'm not a great writer. Or, oh, English is my second language. Or, oh, my grammar isn't strong. And my heart gets broken because I'm like, I would much rather read your heartfelt, honest response in broken English with poor grammar, with all of these mistakes, and get to know you than a so called perfect sentence that's not yours, that's in fact identical to everyone else that was cheating. right? And that produces the same thing.
Mm.
And they don't see that because they feel what's most important is to present as perfect. And so they don't think that writing is thinking. They don't think that writing is a personal expression. They think writing is a task I have to do in order to get a grade. I want the highest grade possible, so I better find the best writing and present it as my own. And that's soul crushing. Uh, I hear stories of folks who've outsourced birthday cards to AI, right?
Mm.
Same
Mm.
logic. It's my mom's 80th birthday. She's been an incredible mother. I'm a poor writer, so I'm going to go to ChatGPT and, oh my gosh, look at what it produced. Look at this essay, like, right? But GPT doesn't know your mom, doesn't know you, doesn't know the relationship. Why is that superior? And, I'm not going to talk about the fMRI stuff again because you already shot us down low on that. But I do write in the article how MIT looked at them and said, again, from their studies, someone who wrote with ChatGPT feels no ownership, no connection to those
Yeah.
words. It's
Yep.
something else. And it's really sad to see. And there's something else that I think is really sad to see in this. I've been reading articles that say we're now finding new turns of phrase in industries where they weren't there before. So because, for example, so many government officials are now using ChatGPT, the language of government documents has shifted. And it's so sad. Like my philosophical training is in pragmatism. And I loved Rorty's line of never use the words of your opponent to convince them of your position, right? His whole point was don't use their words, use your words. And we're losing that because now we're all relying on a single repository of words in every field, in every industry to make every point. And we've forgotten what writing is and what it's supposed to be. And so it's just heartbreaking. And what I noted in the article, which was particularly sad, is that, the editors of a scientific magazine had to remind their audience, right, who are researchers, that, you know what, when you go through that exercise of writing your paper, that's part of the thinking. That's part of the research. That's part of the science. And if you
Mm.
instead you're
Yeah.
just providing prompts, you're missing out. So
You
it's
have to,
it's
I mean, it's like, delegating your writing to a ghostwriter,
mhm,
and also to a ghostwriter who's working, by definition, only with cliché, so only with
mhm,
things that have already been said,
mhm, mhm,
and it skips all of the processes of thinking about the thing you want to write about, deciding what you think, deciding how you feel, and organizing your thoughts, and trying to go from something that you have inside to conveying it outside yourself in words. So none of that
mhm,
is present.
mhm,
And yeah, I read that description of the experiment they did, and one of the things was that none of the people who'd used AI could quote any parts of the essay,
mhm,
or
mhm,
they didn't know what they'd said, actually. They didn't know
mhm,
because they just got AI to do it, and so they had at no point thought about the subject at
mhm,
all. And usually, I guess in education, the writing is used as evidence for the fact that you've done some thinking.
mhm,
So there might also be you might also get marks given or deducted for how elegantly you've expressed your thinking, but the point is the writing shows that you have sat down and thought. Whereas I could tell AI to generate an essay on, I don't know, um, coelacanths or something, and I
mhm,
could not read the essay at all and just hand it to you, and I would have had no thoughts about coelacanths in my head at
mhm,
all. I
mhm,
wouldn't have had
mhm,
to in any way engage with the subject. So that's for me a real problem. And of course, human beings being the way that we are, if we have a shortcut, we will use the shortcut. We're all descended from people who took every shortcut possible, um,
mhm,
because otherwise you would have been outcompeted for resources and mates, etc. Whilst you were still, whilst you're still walking from A to B, your rival man is taking the car and he's
Yeah.
impregnating the woman. I mean,
Yeah.
that because he's gonna get there faster. So we we have a kind of deep evolved tendency to use shortcuts wherever possible because time is the one that is the most precious resource, the one resource that's not that you once spent you can't get back, and which we all have equal amounts of, or unpredictable amounts of, equally unpredictable amounts of. But the issue is that it allows you to produce writing without any previous thought of your own or any engagement of your own.
Yeah.
And that to me seems very weird, and also tends to produce stuff that isn't in any way fun to read. So it's kind of revealed to me how many pieces of writing there are that you have to do that nobody wants to write and no one wants to read, but that
Right.
just have to be kind of produced, like,
Right.
I don't know, grant application,
Right. Right.
applications
Right.
or
Right.
job applications or cover letters. People send me cover letters when they send in an article submission very frequently, and I never read. I don't think I've ever read any of the cover letters because either I'm going to like and publish the article or I'm not, and the cover letter will make no difference to that.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that people are using ChatGPT for, which is a piece of writing that they feel they have to produce, but which they
Right.
neither want to write nor do they assume anyone wants to read.
Right.
Um, so
But
there's
let's
this
flip this
weird
for a
whole
second.
kind of ghost area.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, but so now let's flip it. I did an interview recently for radio on specifically the topic of writing. And I spoke to a colleague after, an academic, a fellow academic. I'm not going to name him. I love him. He's a good person. And he said, very nice statement, So for you who loves to write and the other dinosaurs out there who love to write, this is all very meaningful. But to me, I don't care. I'm happy to see writing gone. I'm happy to find other ways to report. I don't care to read it. I don't care to write it. And he's like, yeah, you'll do great in your little circle of intellectuals who still want to write. I'm not one of them. He's an academic. He's an academic. I talk to my students. They say the same thing. They say, okay, yeah, so maybe there's a world where we don't write. Great. And so, you and I are in the writing game because we love it, because it's a passion, because it's a skill that we value and an experience that we value. But I hear from people who will look me in the eye and say, yes, let's go to a world of no reading and no writing. And I'm excited for that world. And I'm happy that ChatGPT should bring me there. And it's like,
I mean, there
it's really
are
well.
some
And
people whose writing is so bad that I kind of feel like it would be the world would be probably improved by them never writing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I can think of so many use cases that are not not related to scholarly work at all. So for example, so a close friend of mine's brother recently died, and I offered to quote unquote help him write something about his brother, maybe just for the family or to read at the funeral or maybe even just for his own personal satisfaction. This is a very intelligent person. He's not usually a writer, but I don't think he'll actually need my help at all. My experience when I've helped people write things of this kind after a bereavement is they don't actually need any help. They just need you
Mhm.
to encourage them to know that they can write
Right,
something, and
right,
then they
right,
just need you to read it and say, "That's great."
right,
um,
right.
because actually what's needed there is entirely personal. It's how you felt about the person and what your relationship is with the person, what you want to celebrate about their life, what you were able to get from them, etc. So all of which is can't be written by somebody else, has got to be
Right,
written by you.
right,
Um, and I think that a lot of writing and thinking is like that, that what you're doing when you're reading something, hopefully, what you're doing when you're reading something, for example, is you are making that thing part of your personal mind palace. Like you are enriching your own
Right.
brain with having read
Right.
the thing. And when you're writing, even if you're doing something as simple as just underlining passages in a book, right? So this is, I'll, I'll really stretch the definition here and say that that's a form of writing. You're not actually
Right.
producing even any original words. You're just highlighting the passages that were meaningful to you. Even that is personal. So what you're doing is you're making those passages part of your mental world,
Right.
and you
Right.
are enriching who you are as a person. And it's very different if you just told the AI to read it and highlight passages for you.
Right. 100%. You know what you're saying, it echoes a conversation I had with someone for the book. They're from the theater world. But we were talking about the importance of coming into shared social spaces, the importance of going to the theater. We ignorantly mentioned the fMRI research. I'm sorry, but we were still living on that sort of idea. And we were trying to say, okay, so we're the dinosaurs that love the theater. We love the concerts. How do we bring these folks out? When will they come out? And what he said, which echoes what you said, is he said, when they're in grief, when they recognize that there's a moment that requires deep emotional engagement, that's when they step out of this paradigm. That they'll come to the theater, they'll come to the novel, they'll come to the arts when they're ready to feel. And most of the time, they're not ready to feel. And I think that was the argument, my colleague was making. Because my colleague was saying, my scientific research, I don't really want to read it. I report it because it's my job. And so I got to do it. But no, if I could just write one sentence, that'd be great. And so
I
maybe,
think he's not
maybe,
alone.
right, right? And I feel, again, not to get too personal here, but we've often struggled because when I, as someone who loves writing, takes the lead on the writing, our paper is more likely to get rejected. And when the writing is more mechanical and uninteresting and soulless and academic, it tends to be when we hit, right? So I'm not even sure if it's writing or if it's, something different. And that's where the AI question starts to actually become interesting. Because the AI question starts to become interesting because, okay, we started earlier, you mentioned how it's getting worse for editing. Okay. But what if it wasn't getting worse for editing, right? So what if we said
For
creative
proofreading,
writing? I
not
don't
not
Mhm.
editing, just proofreading.
Proofreading,
Um,
any piece of
mm,
it, not any piece of that puzzle. If we have to start saying, well, maybe this is the creative human piece, but this is the algorithmic piece, right? So maybe there are
mm.
parts of proofreading that may not down
Oh,
the road need
absolutely.
a human.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah,
was already
yeah,
the case with spell
yeah,
checkers and
yeah,
things
yeah.
like
That's
that.
right. That's right. That's right.
Also, translators, well before LLMs, because I used to work as a translator, and, I still do occasionally do translation. Well, I did a few translations for Quillette, and translators have always worked with a kind of proto LLM, which is,
Hmm.
there are websites. One of them's called Lingway.com, one of the
Hmm.
more famous ones, and what you can do is you can enter your phrase on that website in the language, and it has a database of texts, and it will give you quotations from different texts. So it will say, here's a bunch of texts that use that phrase
Hmm.
in French, and here are translations of those texts in English.
Hmm.
And you look through them to see if any of them correspond closely to what you're trying to say. And
Hmm.
if so, maybe you'll use one of those phrases. So it will say, in these contexts, here's this French phrase in a whole bunch of different contexts, and here's how people have translated it in a whole
Hmm.
bunch of different contexts.
Hmm.
Take your pick.
Hmm.
Often none of those quite work, but they give you an idea of what might work. And then
Right.
you go to another kind of database, in a sense, which is the thesaurus, an English thesaurus. And you
Right.
think, okay, well, this French word means kind of something like mocking, but not quite mocking. So what
Right.
you do is you go to the English thesaurus and you put in the word mocking, and you see what synonyms for mocking come up and which of them seems to you most closely adjacent to the meaning of the French word. So usually when
Right.
people are translating, I hope this isn't too much inside baseball for people, but when people are professional translators are working, they rarely use a dictionary. So I'm
Right.
not usually looking up the French word in a French to English dictionary to see what the dictionary tells me. What I'm doing is I'm using an English to English dictionary like the
Right.
OED, or I'm using
Right.
an
Right.
English to English thesaurus
Right.
because I already know what the French word means usually. But what I don't know is exactly what the precise way to express it is in English. So mostly I'm looking up words I already know the meaning of, and I'm just trying to find what's the best, closest English equivalent that really captures what I want to say. So that, in a sense, is using a kind of LLM database. And it's not that different, except the LLM at the moment is worse at translating than using those old tools. But you could kind of see an LLM incorporating those tools to give you suggestions, and you've still gotta
Yes.
choose between suggestions,
Yeah.
but
See,
at
so
least
I
there's
love what you
some
just said.
impact. Yep.
I
Mm.
Yeah, no, I love what
Yeah,
you just
carry on.
said because it comes back to what you noted earlier about how we're lazy and we look for shortcuts. Because, when I think of how now Google's introduced for certain languages, right? Google Translate, that, I can be there with my phone, you can be there with your phone, and they'll translate. But it's going to give a singular translation in real time. And that singular translation will probably be inaccurate. But if the tool was as you suggested, right? If it translated it 5 different possible ways, and then I was using my intuitive sense based on the body language of the person I'm talking to, based on their motions, hand motions, etc. So I can pick one of the five, that could be an incredibly helpful tool. I don't
Yeah,
think though Google's interested in
I'm
providing that,
yeah, I'm a
right?
bit more skeptical about that. So now you're talking about interpreting rather than
Yes.
translating, i.e. real
Sorry.
time,
Yes.
verbal, back and
Right.
forth in conversation, and I think that when people are using Google Translate for that, they're sticking to very basic things. As soon as there's possibility of nuanced interpretation, you it's just not gonna work, at least at present. It's just not gonna work. What you want is you're in the shop and your interlocutor is Chinese and you're trying to get an idea from him. I mean, I think that the problem is that you won't have enough knowledge of the other language to be able to
Right.
choose between different nuanced
Right.
variants. So you probably can't outsource that.
I don't
I
fault
don't think body language will help very much.
So I don't know. Like again, I wonder if we're being
Yeah,
specialists. Because I'll
maybe.
give you an example,
Mm,
right, from lived experience. So I'll watch a movie with my wife that's in a foreign language that I speak and she doesn't. And we'll have the
mm,
subtitles on. And as we're
mm.
watching, I'll be like, oh, they'll translate, it's terrible. They missed the point, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of it, she'll look at me and be like, I enjoyed it. You enjoyed it. We
Yeah.
both walked away.
Yeah.
So, like, you can sit here and tell me, oh, I missed the nuance of this line here. But from a practical purpose, right, the function was served. And,
Yeah, yeah,
it keeps coming
that's
back
right.
to that same question, which is how much of what those of us who specialize in culture, in creativity, in writing, in translating, etc., value is actually valued by the masses. And to the extent that it's not valued by the masses, once there are tools that do a bad job of it, how quickly will those tools be adopted? And I worry that they're going to be adopted pretty quickly.
Very fast. Yeah,
Yeah,
instantly.
yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
always been the case that the things I value have not been valued by the masses. If
Right.
you can publish a very thoughtful, long essay piece or share a very thoughtful, long form piece, which is just brilliantly and beautifully written. And there will be three people will like it or comment. And then if you took a photo of your boobs, not that you have boobs, or your wife's boobs, and you
Yeah, yeah,
post that,
yeah,
1,000 people will like it. And so that's the case, that that's been the case forever. I think the more worrying sense to me is that you can accept information from something without reading it and without actually putting any thought. So it can go straight from you're asked the question and you give the answer using the LLM to give the answer. And at no point have you ever thought about or engaged with the question. Um, that's kind of my concern with the writing. And there's also
Right.
a more general question, which is people are I think that educators are always going to be on the back foot. So you will never now be able to tell whether people have read the books or not. So it used to be the case that when I did my undergraduate degree, we had a supervision, as we call them, every week. And in order to have the supervision, you had to have written an essay first. So you had the book that you were reading that week, the book or books that you were reading that week. I did English literature. So let's say you were reading Middlemarch that week, then you would write your essay on Middlemarch and you put it under your tutor's door by midnight the night
Hmm.
before, like
Hmm.
at 5 minutes to midnight because we were
Yes.
students, you know.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then you would come in and the supervisor would read your essay aloud in class and would quiz you on it. And you would have to defend the things that you had written in your essay. So you had to do some form of engaging with the book, and people did cheat even then, of course. They had, like, Brodie's Notes and other kind of books that gave you
Right.
summaries and gave you quotations and things like that. So you could definitely cheat, but your cheating would fall apart in cross-questioning because
Right.
you wouldn't
Right.
really have absorbed anything. And that form of work is going completely by the wayside. First of all,
Yes.
what university has the money to question people on their
Yes.
essays anymore? And
Yes.
secondly, the essay itself will be just AI generated in a lot of cases and quickly in the majority of cases. Then you could move over to examining people by just having oral presentations and handwritten exams.
Yep.
Um, and then you've got the issue that people are so bad at handwritten exams. For one thing, it's gonna make your job a lot worse because 'cause you're gonna be reading some absolutely awful stuff. But
Yeah.
also, people are now using Google Glasses and things like that
Yeah.
to do that in person, and you won't be able to make people take off their glasses. It will
Yeah.
be an integrated function in the person's glasses or contact lenses or,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
or neural implant or whatever it might be. So you will be you will have increasingly the issue that students will be ventriloquizing and they won't actually have placed any thought in. So you won't be able to assess. You won't be able to assess anyone's learning. And maybe the thing to do will be to give up on assessments. That would be my suggestion if I were in teaching. I would say, okay, you come to class and you read these things if you want to, and you write about them if you want to. It's optional, and I'm not gonna grade anyone. Um, but I think I would probably be fired if I were in academia for
Right.
nowadays.
Right.
But
So
that's a question more specific to education,
yeah.
but it's
Um. There's so
part
many
of a more
pieces. Can I
general
jump
thing,
in or not
which
yet?
is
Sorry.
yeah,
Finish. Yeah.
please jump in. Sorry, I'm talking
Okay.
too
So
much.
the you
Please jump
again you
in.
touch on so many pieces and so one thing first thing. So in my book, I talk about the difference between algorithmic thinking and artful thinking. This is what we're calling artful thinking. And the main difference is an algorithm wants the decision making process to come to an end, right? An algorithm has served its purpose when it reached the end. If then, end. Whereas we are wired to want more choice. We're curious. We're inquisitive, right? We want to keep choosing, choosing, choosing. And I used to think that that was a universal truth, right? That all of us humans, we wanted choice, we wanted to think. I don't know anymore if it's a universal truth because I've been teaching for over 20 years and I've been wrestling with this question for a long time because frankly, at least in my institution, in the business school, cheating's been going on for decades. Like before LLMs, I'm sorry, kids, those of you who are listening, but we know that most of them were hiring people to write their essays. We caught them on that.
Mm.
We caught them all sorts of creative cheating. Once we found folks cheating because they would write the exam and then they knew which room the exams were being stored in. So they would submit a blank one and then slide their finished one hours later before midnight under the door, thinking that when we come in, we'd find it on the floor and think it out of the box. So they were always cheating, right? Cheating's not new. But a few years ago, as the LLM question started, reigning large, and online learning started reigning large, I gave my students a choice. That's one group. I said, here's two worlds for how we can proceed. All right. World one, we're going to meet, we're going to chat, we're going to do what you were talking about. You're going to read, we're going to talk, I'm going to grill you. And this is the words I use. I said, but I'm going to love you in that classroom. I'm going to love you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to lift you up. I'm not going to go easy on you, but your grade won't suffer. But I'm going to call you to task. I'm going to quiz you and push you and make you think. That's option one. Option two, ASIM, we never meet. You're online. I'm going to grade you hard. Okay. And if I catch you cheating, I'm going to fail you. But I'm not going to ask you anything in real time. I'm not going to grill you. If you can fool me, you can fool me. So be it. 95% of my students prefer the latter. They don't want to be
Mm.
pushed, even if it means the university experience becomes cold and clinical and distant and minimal, quite frankly. That's what they want. That's the future they want. And I don't know how we reverse that. Like, forget the question of assessment and grades. You know,
Mm.
I-
Mm.
One of the things I wrestle with in my writing, and I have a not-for-profit Artful Intelligence Institute that's wrestling with this, is what does the university mean if we're just an institute for accreditation? If all we're doing is giving a stamp that says you can hire this kid, that's not a university. So what are you
Mm.
doing? And frankly, if that's all we're doing, then we should be replaced by AI. Like, in other words, if we're not going to push them, if we're not going to grow them, if we're not going to have this human to human expectation, if we're outsourcing our teaching to Sims and videos, then why, like, one of the things that I'm very bothered by in my university, and I've said this, so I don't mind being on the record again, is, you know, we've integrated a lot of Harvard's material into our class. So we use their videos, their cases, etc. If that's the case, why do we need our university, right? Eventually, because of technology, might just be one university, just Harvard, and everyone downloads those videos and lectures, and AI grades the assignment, etc. Like we're making ourselves obsolete by not thinking about this further. And the answer is sort of ugly because I know the answer. The answer is if we did what you and I are talking about, our enrollment will plummet at least by half, probably by 80%. But again, business school, I say, well, that might be a good thing because imagine how prestigious our business school would be if we let it be known that we're not playing this game anymore, that we're going to go back to old style learning, interaction. You're asking me questions face to face. You're presenting. I'm grading you. I know you. My letter of reference means something. I'm only graduating 20 students, but let the best firms in the world compete for those 20 students. How elite would that program be, right? But that's not
Mm.
what we are anymore. We're not elite institutions. We're institutions for everyone. And so,
Well, the amount of money you'd have to charge each of those 20 students,
but we can do
or
that. We already in the
right.
business school, we have an executive ed program. We charge six figures for the executive ed
Mm.
program. So
Mm.
we already have that model. So why aren't we pushing it to make them better? Why are we just using that higher tier for an elite group of executives to socialize with each other? You know, I tell my kids to their, first year university, now they're young. I think they may be one of the last generations going to university because I don't understand the value proposition of our institutions if things keep
Yeah,
going
me neither.
the way we're going.
David,
Yeah.
we should draw this to a close quite soon, but
Yes.
is there anything that you wanted to say that I haven't given you a chance to say?
I think that the discussion we had today was narrowly about AI, but I think it's about something bigger because I
Mm.
think we can have the same discussion about politics. We can have the same discussion about relationships. We can have the same discussion about mass culture, etc. You know, what does it mean to be human? We're in an era right now where that's being questioned. And, whether the fMRI technology is accurate or not, whether this research is accurate or not,
Mm.
that's a side question. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
matters you know, is writing something that we can give up? Is civility something that we can give up? Is the need to gather together something that we can give up? A lot of folks in the political realm, for example, are saying, yeah, we can give it up. I can have all my speeches be generated by AI. I could attend these governing sessions remotely. You'll never see me, and that's good governance. Oh, is it? Right? And so I think that, you know, we're looking at a technology that's disrupting us. And we can push aside the bigger questions because we can say, well, the tech isn't there yet. So it's not really forcing us to think about it yet. But if we wait until the tech is here, it'll be too late. And if we wait longer so that another generation isn't learning how to read, isn't learning how to write, isn't learning how to question, it's going to be too late. And so, one of my frustrations has been, as a writer, folks aren't reading anymore, so we're not having this debate. So I've gone on the road. We have wonderful events in San Francisco, in New York. We're having events all over where I'm bringing in musicians and psychologists and scientists, and we're all getting together and talking this out. And people come out to that. People are still coming out to physical events. And so I think that the bigger thing I want to say is that if you're not interested in tech, and you're not interested in the business side of this, you still need to pay attention to these questions because they're affecting every aspect of our communal life. And you can't ignore it. You might come on the other side of it, right? You might be like my colleague who says, goodbye writing, goodbye reading, I won't miss you. Okay, at least you have an opinion. But you can't ignore this debate.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, David. It's been a
Thank
pleasure
you,
to
Iona.
talk to you.
Yeah.